Hello, my name is Paul. I'm here to introduce you to the 40K Multiset rule set for Fantasy Grounds 3.3.2 and higher. The Multiset it grew from the Dark Heresy version 1 rule set, and it's an attempt at allowing you to play any of the RPGs in the 40K series. That would be 6 different games. It would be Dark Heresy version 1, Dark Heresy version 2, Rogue Trader, Death Watch, Black Crusade, and Only War. The way I went about that was the use of options. GMs, when you come in, you're going to set your options as you normally would. What you need to pay attention to are these game system options. They're set by the GM. If you notice, they default to Dark Heresy version 1. That's the basis of the rule set. And then they're broken up into categories: rules, talents, weapon qualities, and finally a few weapon upgrades. The idea behind these options, these are the things that affect the automation of this rule set. There's a lot of things we have to handle manually. For instance, the way a talent like Swift Attack or Lightning Attack work throughout the various systems. Those you're moderating through the tabletop and through communication with the players. If it affects a dice roll from the character sheet, I needed to be able to handle that, and I picked that up through the options. What these options are doing is they allow you to play system pure. So this would result in all the rules from Dark Heresy 1. If you cycle these, let's say you're going to set up and run Rogue Trader and use only the rules from that, you just simply cycle through all of these to Rogue Trader, and if any of the rules included with Rogue Trader, that's what would be that's how the automation would handle it. The strength of this system, I think, is the ability to mix and match, the ability to bring in and have Death Watch and let's say you're running some Death Watch and Only War characters, or Rogue Trader and Dark Heresy characters together. You're able to go ahead and do that, have the proper character sheets, and then you as the GM, you can make a decision on how you want to run the game, what mechanics you want to use, what rules you want to use, and that's all done through these options. I'm going to run through these options. I'm going to start down here at the weapon qualities and the weapon upgrades. These are pretty straightforward. Whatever system you have this set for, that weapon quality will work as it should to those rule systems. Some of these, say for instance Tainted. Tainted is a rule from Black Crusade. I find it handy sometimes in a Dark Heresy game to include that. That's why it's added here. So you're able to say, hey, I'm playing Dark Heresy 1. By cycling that, Tainted is now allowed as you play this. So based on how you have these set is what rule system they're going to be under. Take note that you really need to understand what they're doing and how it's going to affect your game. You can get some pretty unexpected results if you're not familiar with what the qualities do over the different systems. That's really all there is to these. Understand what they're doing, cycle to which way you want to play. Do you want to use the rules for maximal? That allows plasma guns to shoot at maximal setting. That was introduced in Death Watch. So if you have this set to Dark Heresy or Rogue Trader, it's not really going to do anything. They weren't included in that system, and that's what I'm using to signify that shouldn't be allowed or should be allowed. To Death Watch, now the character sheets will display maximal. We cycle that back to Dark Heresy version 1. Coming back up here to talents, there's really only 4 talents. And these directly affect to hit or damage rolls. So the automation in Fantasy Grounds, if you're not familiar with Fantasy Grounds, there's a lot of great tutorials on how to use the combat tracker, how to link your tokens to the combat tracker, how to link the token to the battle map, how to use targeting. right? That's really outside the scope of what I'm trying to show you here today. I have to assume you have some knowledge of Fantasy Grounds as I'm going through. So if you're not familiar, take a little bit of time, um, view those tutorials, um, and familiarize yourself, because there's a lot of great automation in here. So when you're linked in the combat tracker and you're making targeted rolls, if something directly affected the damage roll, I need to add it as an option. Anything that affected your skill rolls, ability rolls, things like that, those became options. As I comb through the 6 different rule sets, really these talents are the only ones that are directly related to hit or damage in a way that needed to be represented. There's plenty of talents that give you plus something to weapon skill, and that can be handled through modifiers, either scrolling here and making a dice roll to get that +2, using modifiers themselves. You go ahead and when you set these up, you click over there, make a dice roll, or by using your hotkeys. Since there's so many different ways to apply modifiers, I'm really looking for the things that directly affected my damage calculations. I'm going to be making more tutorials, and I'll get deeper into the character sheets and the character sheet tabs and how to use them to full effect. I just want to really cover what the basis of these options are and what they're for. The rules portion is a little more involved. These directly affect how the character is set up, or how the first one, and I consider the major one. We have in these games essentially, I would call it set 1 and set 2. Dark Heresy version 1, Rogue Trader, Death Watch, versus Black Crusade, Only War, and Dark Heresy version 2. Set 1, they handle degrees of success and failure one way. Set 2 handles them a little bit differently. It's essentially the same. The net result would be, if you made a dice roll in Dark Heresy version 1, if you calculated it under the only roll rules, you'd end up with 1 more success. It's just the way they're doing the math or viewing the dice. If you understand the difference between the systems, you could always do this. You could say, I want the degrees of success and failure from Only War, but I'm going to play with the rest of the Dark Heresy version 1 rules. The system will handle it. This rule set will handle, the automation will handle it. You as the GM need to know if that's the way you want to go. The next one, demonic trait. That affects damage calculation and bonuses for toughness and things like that. This is included because it's handled differently throughout the different rule sets. Hordes and formations. Death Watch, Black Crusade, and Only War add another type or category of adversary. That being hordes in Black Crusade and Death Watch, formations in Only War. So it's a little bit for mass combat. I've included support for them here. So if you're cycled to Dark Heresy version 1, these aren't included. There's no automation for them. Righteous Fury. The set 1 games, the set 2 games handle them a bit differently. One system, it's a confirmed dice roll and extra damage. The other, it's simply roll a d5 and it does a d5 level crit. This can be cycled to it's called Zealous Hatred in Black Crusade, by the way. So you can cycle through and decide the way you want Righteous Fury to work. So if you like the later systems, you find it's a little bit cleaner. Again, you can play with the Only War and be in a Dark Heresy version 1 game. The skill list. So let's say you've decided to mix and match, and now you have an Only War character and you have Rogue Trader characters. Well, the skill lists are very different between those 2 game systems. The later, the set 2 games, their skill lists are pretty similar. The set ones are The set ones are very similar also. A few skills vary, some are in, some are out between the set one, but set two skills are completely different. They streamlined it. Set one, you have basic and advanced skills. Set two, you just have one skill list. Well, if you're going to allow, to me as a GM, if I was going to allow different characters from different systems, I wanted one unified skill list so I didn't have half the characters rolling something and half the characters rolling something else. So this, as a GM, you could force on everyone one certain skill list. Or you could be playing Rogue Trader, but you really like the streamlined skill system from Only War. Force this to Only War or Dark Heresy version 2, whatever you want. So this gives you plenty of options as a GM to even just place almost system pure, just pluck the things you like from the other systems out. This is a big one, unnatural characteristic, and I'm going to show you the character sheet here in a second. There's a caveat using this, but set one and set two games. In the set one games, this is a multiplied bonus. So your characters pick up the unnatural characteristic talent. You have your bonus, and it multiplies by this would read unnatural characteristic 2. So let's say you had a bonus of 3, your total bonus would be 6. In the set 2 games, say Only War, this is additive. So unnatural characteristic 2 with a bonus of 3, you'd have a 5. So they calculate different. You need to know what you're in for as a GM before you choose this. Or if you happen to be running a pure system, Black Crusade, Only War, Dark Heresy version 2, you need to be aware of how this is handled on the character sheet. So let me bring up a character sheet here. These are some presets. I want to show you what you get when you make a new character. So here's launching a new character. GMs, make sure you have all the options the way you like them set up before players start making characters. As you change some of these options, especially the skill list, I can show you that. I'll show that in this tutorial. We'll get to that. Let me cover some of the basics here. So what you do is in the upper right hand corner here, there's a cycler, and that will cycle you through all the different game systems. And as you cycle this, the different tabs are also changing to what's relevant to that game system. So cycle to the system that you're going to play, head over to the XP tab. I'm going to go ahead and just assign a value here, and I'll show you what I mean by a natural characteristic. This calculates and defaults. Remember, the default system is Dark Heresy version 1. So this is defaulting to a 1, which is correct for Dark Heresy, Rogue Trader, and Death Watch. I stress this a lot, GMs, because it's going to create some headaches for you if the characters aren't set up correctly, and also for your NPCs. I'll go ahead and bring up a new NPC here. If you look at that, this number 1 is the unnatural characteristic. It's this same bonus. So GMs, this will default to 1 if you're playing a set 1 game. If you're playing a set 2 game, these need to be cycled back to zeros. Let me say that again. If you're playing Black Crusade, Only War, or Dark Heresy version 2, you need to set these to 0 for all your NPCs and all your characters. Okay, I'm going to show you what this is doing. Notice this goes to 0. If I were to cycle this, let's go ahead and cycle that up to Black Crusade. Go ahead and toggle this up and down so it refigures. Now the bonus is back to 3. It's additive. 3 plus 0 is 3. The bonus is your characteristic. So 33 divided by 10 rounded down for 3. So 3 plus 0 is 3. Go back. We cycle that. It's back to 0. So default for set 1 games, you need 1. For set 2 games, you need this to be 0. We just cycle one of these and reset that so you're back to 3. So the result, when they get the talent, a natural characteristic, let's say 2, that bonus is 5. Now the bonus is 6 when this is set to Dark Heresy. So you really need to watch that for both the NPCs and the PCs. GMs, make sure that that's set correctly so you don't get unexpected results for a lot of dice rolls. Anytime it calls in for the characteristic bonus, it'll be calculated wrong if you don't have this set correctly. So that's my one big warning. I tried to code around that. There was some things I couldn't access. I'm still working on it. Right now, that's why I'm issuing the warning and the gotcha point. If I can figure that out, I will update the rule set. But as it stands right now, these are going to default to 1. Again, I'll delete that, make a new sheet here. You see this again. These default to 1. They default to set 1 games. Well, let's move on. I'm going to show you the skills here. On the skills, you have, right now we're playing with the Dark Heresy version 1. This is the basic skill list for Dark Heresy version 1. So in the set 1 games, characters have access to the basic skills. These are set to 0, but we'll go ahead and come back here. Again, throw that agility back in there. You see any of the agility skills it's halved. When they're trained, they're full. So the automation is handling that for you. When your characters take advancements in their skills, you just need to click those buttons there. But that's all handled right here. For their advanced skills, they don't start off with any. So as you develop them, you can either build your libraries, and I'll get into that in a different tutorial, or right-click and create the items. Here's the shortcuts, and again, we'll cover more about what these shortcuts are used for in a libraries tutorial. Otherwise, you could just drive military, go ahead and cycle to what that's gonna be is its basic trait. So GMs, I allow you to cycle these. There's what's allowed in the core, which is perception, but if you decide it's relevant and they need to use a skill based on a different characteristic, you can have them cycle that and perform that skill roll. And this works just like a basic skill from there. So if it's added, it's they're trained in it. There's no training button because they have an advanced skill. They have to obviously be trained in it. Moving along, when you cycle this, and I'll show you this. I'm going to cycle this to only war because it's different. If you notice, this changed from basic skills and advanced to skills and group skills. What I did that for is certain skills are broad skills or category skills, so scholastic lore. That could have several different skills, so it's a skill group. So under your group skills, if you want to expand upon them, you can add them over here. That's just another way to track your skills a little bit cleaner and more obvious. So notice the skill list didn't change yet. But if you were to cycle around, now all of a sudden we have all these underlined skills. We developed this character, we started it with the Dark Heresy version. You accidentally cycled that. Now we have all these skills that are underlined were added in there from Only War. So it's a way you could tell what skills don't belong. So if that happens, if your players see underlined skills here, it's because this was adjusted or they added a custom skill. And you can simply right click, click that, and then get rid of these ones that are underlined if there was some sort of mistake. But that's what happens. So that's why I say GMs, just make your decision on what skill list you want to use, set it once, and then have them build characters, and you won't run into any cases like this where you have to come through and get rid of things or figure out what's going on, what skills should be in and out. That's really the basics of what I have for these options. The options will affect more. I'll go ahead and get a character that has more information on it. These options are going to affect these weapon details, these details, and I'll get into that in the next tutorial covering how to use this weapons box, how to use psychic powers. I'll make another tutorial that will cover the party sheet and the advanced cohesion and subtlety tabs that I've added. Some other things that I've added for support is support for vehicles. I've added support for, we mentioned this before, the hordes and formations. And finally, ships for Rogue Trader. So for really any game, if you want to use some spacefaring vehicles, added some support for the ships. And that will be covered under another tutorial. I'll do a tutorial on vehicles, ships, and hordes. I'm going to do a tutorial for the advanced way to use the weapons, psychic, and go into greater depth on these tabs. And finally, I'll do one to explain the cohesion and subtlety tabs, or really the party sheet in general. The Fantasy Ground forms in the Armory section under Rulesets. You click in there, you'll find the thread 40K Multiset Ruleset. That's where you can download the .pack file to install in your Fantasy Grounds to begin using the rule set. I also have a small PDF there that is a basic guideline. It's really more of a guideline to show you some. Again, I cover in that PDF. Make sure you set the default values for that unnatural characteristic based on the game system. I also have a list of effects that are built in. Again, if you're not familiar with Fantasy Grounds, the effects are these lists here that you can add effects to the character, damage over time, cover, fatigue. Say there's some instance where they get a +10 to all their ballistic skill rolls for X amount of time. You can make those things through the use of the effects system. We'll cover, so I have a list of built-in ones. I'll say this, head over to the Fantasy Grounds wiki, look up the effects and read about those. Specifically read about D&D 3.5. It's the system that I built this rule set off of. So the effects mirror those. They're not exactly the same. Obviously, things that don't apply to 40K are left out. Things that needed to be added were added, but that's how they work. It's a really good way to understand how effects work in Fantasy Grounds. I think that's about it for what I want to cover here. I just wanted to make sure you knew that when you launch the game, to come here to the Options tab. Also go over two more things. I have a little bit of fluff here on this desktop. Things like this. They can be moved, or they can simply be closed because it's in your way and you don't want to see it. It can be locked. You get rid of that if you don't want to see it. Let's say you're going to unlock and move your chat window. These things are just little add-ons. This message of the day changes every time you log in. So if you don't want to see these, if you're changing the positions of your desktop, you can go ahead and there's no reason to have those if you're moving this around. You can also, if you like this, you can move that and position it wherever you want. That's about it. Thank you for taking the time to watch this, and I hope you have fun using this rule set. If you have any bugs to report or any recommendations, comments, please head over to the Fantasy Ground forums and leave them there. Appreciate it. Thank you.